We have now in South Africa, as everyone who's noticed who is here, or even those who are in London voting at Trafalgar Square at South Africa House, that we have a very important election coming up. Perhaps the most important election since our first non-racial parliamentary poll in 1994. We have 70, that's right, 70 parties contending. We have nearly 15,000 candidates competing for 881 seats. At least it's an improvement on the more than 350 that originally, that's parties, 350 political parties that originally registered. In fact, looking at it on one level, it would make an ideal script for writers of satire such as Monty Python, which, as I say, makes for great satire, except that this is South Africa, and therefore there's a dark side to our satire. Last Sunday, for example, in Polokwane, we had our first, I suppose we can call it, electoral clash. There was gunfire, there were pangas wielded, etc. 12 people in hospital, one seriously injured in Polokwane. The police are now concerned about violence breaking out in particularly KwaZulu-Natal, where the majority of political assassinations in the last 2 years have taken place. 19 ward councillors dying. So therefore, there is a very dark and serious and nasty undercurrent, as well as the perhaps amusing or perhaps worryingly amusing side to our politics. We have, take for example, Hlaudi Motsoeneng, the former Chief Operating Officer of the South African Broadcasting Corporation, who the Broadcasting Corporation sacked and is trying to get back from him more than 11 million rand, which he will not pay. And he has set up the African Content Movement. Here is Hlaudi.
ACM leader Hlaudi Motsoeneng says it's up to the voters to choose whether they want to vote for hunger and lies or vote for life.
Then we have the former gangster and bank robber, Gayton McKenzie, now a businessman and politician, who's the head of the Patriotic Alliance, who has a number of very peculiar attitudes and some outspoken, shall we say, diatribes, such as this one.
Muslims, the Muslims are our enemies.
Then we have the more serious element on the worrying side, which I think is particularly worrying. And I wrote about when it first emerged, the economic freedom fighters under Julius Malema. I said, here comes our native-born fascism. I think I wasn't far wrong. And the symbolism of this, when they launched their 10th birthday celebration, I think says it all.
It's guaranteed that under the EFF, this country will be the better. Stand up, South Africa. Make sure that South Africa, you are counted with me. Run, South Africa. Stand and make sure that our people understand that they need to be counted. You must be counted. You must be part of history. You must make sure that you are one of the people who are going to deliver economic freedom in our lifetime. Freedom in our lifetime. Amanda!
So why do we have so many parties? Initially, we started with more than 350 registered political parties and any number of independents who wanted to stand. And I think this is a manifestation of the fact that so many South Africans right across the board have had enough. They're angry. They're aware. We're all aware that we're in a quagmire politically and economically, that we've been landed in this by what most people seem to think are the established politicians, the established parties. We have here, with that rather crude South African term, but very adequate one, the gat-val factor is in full play. So at the end of it, many of those parties, many of the individuals could not afford the deposit, and could not manage to gather enough votes, enough signatures to be able to fully register. So we end up now with 70 political parties right across the board, 52 of them on the national ballot alone. And then we have a provincial ballot, and we have a ballot for independents, and political parties can go in there as well as putting forward independents who are under political colours. And that doesn't confuse matters, but when you look at that, and you look at the number of parties, and you look at the fact that, for example, the Inkatha Freedom Party, long established, has as its posters, and these posters are everywhere, the picture on them. Most of the others have their leader, whoever it is, who's going to portend to be president. They have Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi, Shenge, as he was known. He's been dead since September last year. And yet on the posters it says, "Do it for Shenge." It seems rather strange. We have, from Musi Maimani's Build One South Africa, a job in every home. Well, I thought every home, just about every home, probably has usually a woman who's a wife, a mother, a grandmother, whatever, who has a great many jobs to do, only they're not paid for. So it does look a bit strange. In fact, on one level, one could look at this as being ideal for a Monty Python sketch, for satirists to write about. Of course, we then have Jacob Zuma, the former president, who faces charges for corruption, money laundering, racketeering, etc., and has been managing to keep out of jail rather, for a long time, except that he did get sentenced to 15 months for contempt of court for refusing to give evidence before a government commission. As a result, he has been banned from going back to Parliament, because one is not allowed to if one serves more than, or sentenced to more than a year of prison without the option of a fine. But his picture is everywhere on the polls and posters for the Umkhonto we Sizwe Party, the MKP, which he says he leads, but at the same time claims to be still a member and a leading member of the governing African National Congress. It does make for, well, the most incredible satire. But it, unfortunately, being South Africa, we have a very dark side to our satire. We have, for example, in the last 2 years, there have been more than 19 that we actually know of ward councillors who've been assassinated, political assassinations. And just this week, we had the first of what we hope will not be many clashes in Polokwane, with gunshots being fired, pangas being wielded, and 12 people being injured, one of them very seriously. Those are the two sides of South Africa. South Africa justly has a constitution and a Bill of Rights that is justly hailed around the world. It is not perhaps, I would say, definitely the most liberal, progressive Bill of Rights anywhere. But we do have in these parties that are contending, among the 70 parties, are a number of them who are contending on the basis of wishing to change the constitution. Jacob Zuma's MKP, for example, would like to, along with the ANC if they could persuade them to, change the constitution to put traditional leaders, the kings and chiefs of old, in more political control. Get rid of judges, because according to Jacob Zuma, judges hate him. And when judges hate you, they will persecute you even if you're innocent. We have statements such as that being made. And as I say, one can laugh, one can feel sad, but also at the same time laugh about it. However, we also have the African Christian Democratic Party, supports the death penalty, although it's not on their manifesto this time, but they've publicly said they do. They're against a woman's right to choose, which is part of our constitution, of course, and our Bill of Rights. They're also opposed to the sex education in schools and the fact of teaching about different sexual orientation. In other words, they're anti-gay, they're anti-lesbian, they're anti-anything that is not the normal Christian family. So they would like to change the constitution. However, they are already in Parliament, have been in Parliament, and are likely to be there again, but a minority voice, a tiny minority voice. There'll be a number of other minority voices, including the Freedom Front Plus, Vryheidsfront, which is the old Afrikaner nationalist grouping. Sometimes very good politicians in terms of the administration, etc., but very much still wedded to this narrow nationalist concept. They're part of the mainstream. I thought when this whole thing erupted of hundreds of parties, of individuals being angry, that finally South Africa had perhaps come to a position where the majority of people felt we've had enough. They obviously do, but let's do something. Together, I thought something will emerge. Maybe what was called the Macron moment in France, when Emmanuel Macron suddenly emerged. And the pollsters said, what did the pollsters say? As they usually do, they were wrong. They said he didn't stand a chance, and he completely swept the old parties out of office and moved in himself. I thought, well, maybe this is going to happen here. Only it didn't. We had the fragmentation, which shows the anger, I think. It also shows the degree of fragmentation, emotional fragmentation, political fragmentation. No clarity whatsoever. But a few groups did emerge who have by and large been written off, although in recent weeks a number of the commentariat, a number of journalists, a number of people writing columns who have actually pinpointed and said, these people may have something going for them. And there are three in particular. There is Herman Mashaba, a former mayor of Johannesburg, and his action in South Africa, tainted somewhat by expressions of xenophobia, but being South Africa, that may actually play in his favor. Mmusi Maimane, the former leader of the Democratic Alliance, a party which is the major opposition at the moment, but which seems to spend most of its time shooting itself in both feet in all sorts of ways. He has his Build One South Africa, and just the week before the election, 2 weeks before the election, he launches a book in which he is scathing about the Democratic Alliance, which will it play in his favor? I think it probably will. It might well undermine parts of the DA. And then you have a group that grew out of a think tank and discussion group called the Rivonia Circle in Johannesburg, which has emerged as Rise Mzansi, headed by Songeza Zibi, the former editor of Business Day, the main financial newspaper. And it has done extremely well. It has probably one of the best manifestos. One can still criticize elements of it, as one can with all the others. But the pollsters say 1%. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I would say I thought perhaps this would be the Macron moment party, the party that would bring about this big change. I don't think it's likely. I think it is highly probable that Rise Mzansi will pick up between 5 and 10% of the vote. I think that Build One South Africa with Mmusi Maimane will also pick up a few, maybe 2-3%. And I think Herman Mashaba's group will as well. However, the ANC, which various polls keep saying is not going to make 50%, I think might well just make it. And the reason they will is that they've pulled yet another rabbit of policy out of the hat. 2 weeks before the election, suddenly signed into law is the National Health Insurance Bill, which the Premier, the ANC Premier of Gauteng, announces will mean free healthcare, quality healthcare for every South African once the ANC is back in power. Of course, he had to be countermanded immediately because that's not so. In fact, as so many people have now pointed out right across the health spectrum, etc., this is a promissory note. I call it a promissory note. All it does is it says, we intend to have this national health insurance. Well, yes, that was promised 20 years ago. And we don't have the money. We don't have a timescale. We have not planned anything about it. We've not even discussed with other people who should be involved in it. And everyone agrees it will take at least 10 to 15 years to implement. So, but it is something that went right around the country, saying a national health insurance, free, proper, quality healthcare for all, if the ANC is back in. So you will have a lot of people, particularly in the Eastern Cape, and I've had a lot of feedback from there, saying, well, better the devil we know. They may not be able to do it immediately, but they intend to, you see. So they may yet make it 49, 50%, 50. Well, I can't see them getting much more, even if they do scrape in to get 51 or 52% would be their maximum. And they'll probably slip back to about 45, in which case we'll have a coalition. And it will be a coalition with whom? The newer parties, even if they have the numbers, such even if Rise and Sunset, will not go into coalition with them. They will have to stitch up some sort of coalition, and it will be perhaps more of the same. In which case we're looking perhaps at another election as a chaotic coalition doesn't gel in 2 or 3 years. Who knows? If I'm wrong, and I may well be, we'll have to see. In the meantime, what I would suggest is if anyone really wants to know about what the ANC is all about in terms of the corruption, etc., they should read a book by Ferial Haffajee. And if they want to know about who President Cyril Ramaphosa really is, what makes him tick, there's a wonderful book by Anthony Butler called Just Ramaphosa. Worth reading, worth trying to understand. Because one thing that is going to be difficult, no matter what happens here, is trying to understand exactly what is happening.